Welcome to the Poisoning Podcast. I'm your host, Erin DeLullo. Please like, review, and share this episode with a friend. Today I'm welcoming Ron French. I read one of his just heart-wrenching stories last week and had to reach out to him. Ron is with a publication called Bridge, Michigan, which was one of those great nonprofit local news publications. I don't think they're in print. As you know, many of you do not read enough print news anymore, but they're there covering crises and the news locally. He's been with Bridge since 2011. Before that, he was with the Detroit News. Previously, he lived in Indiana working for newspapers, was a graduate of Purdue University, but has been living in Michigan since 1995. And as his bio states, like any true Michigander, he has a cabin up north. Please help me welcome to the show, Ron French. Ron, welcome to the Poisoning Podcast.
Oh, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So I really enjoyed looking through your work, and when I saw your piece last week, one, love that you put your phone number on the website. So many people are hard to get a hold of. It's refreshing, so thank you. And two, I just have come since moving back to West Virginia, loving local news coverage. We have some great reporters here that they're just things we would never know without them. And you're not getting it in a print paper necessarily. Sometimes you can. Mostly it's just online. So I want to thank you and your colleagues at Bridge, Michigan, for doing this work. You guys really have been covering this devastating opioid crisis in Michigan.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. It was a big commitment we have a small newsroom. We have about 15 journalists, and we committed 2 people. I was one of them, for basically all of 2024 doing nothing but opioid coverage, writing about the impact on the state, and particularly looking a lot at how the opioid settlement dollars are being used or not used. This is sort of what is the story you're talking about is a continuation of that, because as you know, the crisis doesn't end when you hit send. So we just have to keep writing.
no, that's great. And you do. It's so I guess we'll start. We'll start with a piece that how
Yeah.
I found you, the piece on the UP. Now, since we have listeners that may not be familiar with Michigan, can you tell us what the UP stands for?
That's it's the part of the state that's normally left off of United States maps, is the easiest way to put it. It's a little peninsula that goes basically off of Wisconsin. Um, it's it's actually a large chunk of land, but barely anyone lives there. It really is its own world. I tell you,
Mm-hmm.
I suspect parts of your West Virginia are like that too. It's um, very rural, very sparsely populated. It actually is 29% of Michigan's land mass, but only
Wow.
3% of its population. Um, it's it's older, it's poorer, and its population is declining faster than any place else in the
Mm.
state. It's a beautiful place to visit, but apparently no one wants to live there. And it's full of some very small towns that I like the old Mayberry show, the Andy Griffith show. It's like Mayberry with 2 feet of snow is what the Upper Peninsula is like.
Yeah. I've never been north of Traverse. Did I say that right?
Traverse
Yes.
City, yeah.
Traverse City, have had many delicious cherry pies from there. But as I mentioned in our first call, I used to advise a congressman he's passed. He's no longer with us, Dr. Benishek, who lived in the UP. And that's when I really found out all about it. And yes, I think there are a lot of similarities to West Virginia: aging population, poor, um, and spread out. But you just get a lot more snow.
That's true, for better or worse.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about what's happened in this tiny little town.
Sure. Well, the Upper Peninsula is full of towns that are like Rapid River, which is where this took place. It's a small town that had its heyday a couple of generations ago. It's an old logging town. Um, and it's near the area in the state that's full of mines, and so there's a lot of places like Copper Harbor and Iron Mountain are places near here. Um, so what you found there is this is a small town. It's really an idyllic little place. It's an unincorporated 400 people
Mm.
um, that all go to the big city of Escanaba, which has a population of about 12,000 when they want to like really go and have a good time. But there's one flashing light, um, and there's a couple of bars and one restaurant, and that's really all there is. And because it's so small, everyone knows everyone. You're either
Mm.
related or friends with everybody.
Wow. Yes, I know that feeling. I really do. But they've lost how many people
Oh,
from this crisis?
yeah, it's a tragedy. So in this town of 400 people, they've lost five young men to fentanyl overdoses. One in 2022, which was a time when it was a real scourge around all of the United States
Yeah.
mainly, and certainly around most of Michigan. Um, and it really hadn't hit hard in the Upper Peninsula. Everything's a little slower there. Um, and so there was one death in 2022, and then in last year, in over a 12-month period, four people died in this town. Three of them from the same 2021 high school graduating class.
Mm.
And to give you an idea, it's not like a
Mm.
graduating class of 500 or 1,000. This is a graduating class of 35 people. So imagine basically one in 10 people just dying in one year. It's a small town, and so these people would go to the funeral of a classmate, and 2 months later they'd be dead of the same drug. Um, the four people, the football, I heard the football coach speak. He lost four of his former players, including his son. So it's something that while it's happening every place, it really was an example to show just how you can't hide from this any place.
You can't because everyone knows each other there. The community must be just so deep in their blood.
Oh my goodness, yeah, it was just devastating for the community, and they all have these connections, and it's also the sort of community that you may find in rural areas that maybe didn't picture until it happened to them how serious this crisis is, how
Yeah.
devastating this drug is. I can't tell you the number of people I spoke to there who said, well, kids are going to be kids. I remember going out and having beer parties in the woods when I was in high school, and yeah, they like to party, but they'll grow out of it. It was the sort of thing, and I don't blame them. That's what they had experienced until the deaths started happening. They just weren't familiar with how much more potent fentanyl is than the sort of things they might be familiar with when they were growing up.
Not only that, I think they sometimes see it as a big city problem, like a San Francisco issue, a Portland issue, not rural, small town one stoplight issue.
Yeah, in this town, they saw it as an Escanaba issue, which
Issue.
that's the big city in the area because that's 15,000 people. Um, but so they never really pictured their kids having an issue. Even some of them had a few of them had gone to rehab,
Okay.
and all the families knew that there were some addiction issues. One of the families told me they thought that their son's major problem was alcohol, and they said, "Well, we've kind of figured if anything was going to kill him, it was going to be the alcohol." Kind of an odd way to put it, but so there wasn't a realization of how this was different
Mm.
than what they've experienced in the past. And it's a tough lesson, tough way to learn that lesson.
Uh, I truly believe parents are very miseducated on this current drug climate, not just synthetic opioids, but yes, they think it's something that they dealt with in the 60s or 70s, and even marijuana isn't the same as when those parents or grandparents were exposed to it in their youth. I actually was doing a dinner with some people from the church we attend, and I said to them, do you even think 80% of our parishioners know what fentanyl is? or how it would affect their children? And they all looked and they were like, no. I mean, the lack of education, even among community based people, in this time when we are not as community based as we used to be in decades prior, is unbelievable to me. And it's just sad how many people we're losing.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I don't I don't blame these parents. It's like
No, of course
until
not.
it affects your family, until it
Yeah.
affects someone you don't think it's your problem. Um, one of I remember speaking to several people who weren't familiar with fentanyl, so they looked it up when it showed up on the toxicology reports,
Mm.
and finding out. And Aaron, you may have a different figure, but I think it's like 50 times more potent than
Yeah.
heroin.
Hmm.
Um, and um, they were unfamiliar with fentanyl strips. Okay,
Oh, the
they were,
test strips.
yeah, the test
Right.
strips, right? Um, and they were unfamiliar with Narcan,
Yeah.
naloxone,
Yeah.
that can save lives because like they never had to deal with it before. They're getting an awakening now about those issues, and we can talk about that later. But it just was not part of their lives until all this happened at once.
Mm. Yeah, that is very quick. So what? Okay, they weren't familiar with any type of harm reduction strategies, and I always remind our listeners that harm reduction has a very big tent, right? There's,
Right.
overdose centers are considered harm reduction, but I don't think those are accepted in places that are more rural or conservative. But then naloxone is harm reduction, which can just benefit everyone and I think is less controversial. So, what type of strategies have they adapted?
It's still very fresh. They're still trying to figure it out. They're having
Mm.
community meetings to talk about it, raising money, trying to raise awareness, trying to educate members of the community and the broader community in the county's Delta County, um, about the challenges they're facing. One thing it did at a community meeting, the first community meeting they held after the last funeral, they're hoping it's the last funeral.
Mm.
Um, they and I'd never seen this done, which I thought was a great idea. They as the family came up to speak, they passed around these big boxes of Narcan through the aisles, like it was almost
Oh,
like it was like at a church where a collection
yeah,
plate, but instead of that, they were asking everyone to take Narcan,
good, good.
and so they could put it in their cars or in their homes or give it to their kids or whatever. Um, and these are people. I guarantee you, none of them had ever touched this product before.
Right.
So that's a big step. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to tell you how many lives are saved by having that stuff around.
It's the reason the overdose deaths nationwide are dropping is
Right,
because there was controversy around naloxone and Narcan years ago, where people said, well, if we have this around, drugs may try to come find us. I think
right.
was sort of the thinking point
Yeah,
or mindset there. But now it's everyone should just have it because if you've got like 5 minutes to bring someone back,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not that expensive if and really we all have settlement fund dollars that should be in every state that should be able to provide this to have easy access to it. So if you need it, it is there and it's so simple to administer.
Yeah, yeah. There was someone who demonstrated how to use it at this community meeting,
Oh, great.
um, and so yeah, it doesn't harm anything to have it in your glove box,
No.
or just stick it in there with your emergency aid kit, and have it there. Even if you say, well, I don't really know anyone who does that stuff, so it wouldn't matter. The thing that not in this article, but in others that we've written around Michigan is that that people who work with those who have addiction issues say that they are encouraging people to like basically have a designated driver. Okay, where
Sure.
uh, where you have someone who really isn't doing the drug at the moment, so in case there's a problem, they can revive their friend. So
Yeah, it's if it's not there, it can't help anyone. Or if it's a 15-minute drive away, it's too late.
Exactly.
So, what are policymakers in Michigan focusing on? Are they focusing broadly on just the supply, like going after drug distributors, drug dealers, trying to keep the drugs out of people's hands? Or are they focusing on the demand aspect too, which is education, prevention, recovery?
I think it's more on reduction on recovery and
Okay,
treatment.
great.
Um, several leaders of addiction services I speak to talk about like, well, I think what we need to really focus on at the moment is keeping people alive
Mm-hmm.
until they have a chance to find a way to recovery. Okay. That's a change in mindset. So there's that. In Michigan, and it's not terribly unusual, but there's been some challenges involving the opioid settlement funds, which are
Oh,
a great thing. Okay. It's like
of
money
course.
coming in to mitigate this issue. And it's not just totally like states can do whatever they want, like with the tobacco settlement, which, you know, ended up filling some very nice potholes. But that's good stuff, but it didn't mitigate the issue. Here there are strings attached, which are great. Um, the challenge in Michigan, every state figured out their systems differently about how to spend
Right.
that money, you know. In Michigan, half the money went to the state, where there's like all sorts of like controls over and meetings about how they're going to spend the money and who's getting what and everything like that. And there's challenges that direction too. But at least there are a lot of experts they talk to. Um, but half the money goes to local municipalities. Okay, that's
Okay.
fine. It's like that's where the problem is. They're closer to it, and they know what services are.
So those are cities, towns, and counties.
They
That's
are the primary funding is to counties
the counties. Okay.
and some to townships and some to cities. But not all townships or cities receive money. Some of them are just too rural and too small. But every county receives funds, and I think a total of over 200 different municipalities in the state receive
Hmm.
some funds. Okay.
Wow.
Um, but the challenge for that is, especially when you get into rural communities like where Rapid River is located, and almost all of the Upper Peninsula, um, the money goes into a bank account for the county commissioners to decide what to do. Uh, Nothing, not speaking disparaging them at all, but these are like farmers and the president of the local real estate company and things like that who oftentimes are doing these jobs because no one else would do them,
Hmm.
and they're used to dealing with zoning issues and things, and then someone says, here's $500,000 to solve your drug problem. It's like, what do you mean? One, what is the drug problem? Two, I don't know how to fix it. So there's a lot of challenges like how to spend this money, especially in local areas with people who don't have the expertise to know what to do with it. We and another challenge in Michigan is that the way it's set up is no one is keeping track of this money. And so you
Hmm.
have hundreds of millions of dollars going to local communities, and there's no reporting, there's no accounting system for it. And so no one knows what's going on with it. Bridge, Michigan, did try to track down that how that funding went, and we found that if the money started coming in Michigan in January of 2023. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. A year and a half later, 40% of communities had not spent a dime yet. Okay. Not spent a dime. Some of the communities who had spent money, most of them had spent them wisely, or were trying to.
Hmm.
But there were also communities that were spending, just sticking in their general fund accounts, figuring, well, we spent money on runs from our ambulance service for people who had drug overdoses, so we've had past expenses, so we'll just reimburse ourselves. That's really not how the money's supposed to be spent. Um, but you have 40% of the communities not spending anything, including Delta County, where Rapid River is located, had not spent a penny of their money yet. So it's,
Wow.
yeah.
And so is there uproar among some of the citizens in these areas?
Usually when there's a crisis, like you saw in Rapid River, suddenly people are noticing that they haven't spent any money and they're trying to figure out what to do. You know, I do have a lot of sympathy for these county
Sure.
commissioners. Yeah, it's like they don't know how to spend it, and oftentimes in these rural areas, the amount, well, it seems big when you add it all together. When you get to a small county, you're talking this county has about $200,000 in the bank now. They'll eventually get like 1.6 million or something. But but they have 200,000 in the bank right now. What do you do with $200,000? It's not like you're going to open up a treatment center.
Yeah,
You know,
it's not
that's
enough.
no one or two employees and some boxes of Narcan, which is fine, great, but it does that solve the issue? And so in that county where these deaths occurred, they are now finally 2 years later asking for proposals for how to spend the money. So they are now
Mhm.
taking steps, but it took them a while, but they're getting there.
Wow. So, what about in bigger areas of the state and larger populations? What are they spending their settlement dollars on?
Most of it on treatment and recovery, and then and especially if you count Narcan and
Hmm.
naloxone as part of treatment. So those if those three things I think are what they're spending most of the money on. Not as much on education,
Oh,
um, but more on once you have a challenge, what are you going to do about it?
what are the barriers to access for treatment in Michigan right now? Do you know?
Oh, access and availability, especially in the rural areas. Michigan is a relatively large state, but almost all the population lives in the bottom half. Okay.
Right.
And so once you get north of a certain highway, it gets it gets very rural very fast. And so yes, there's a smaller population, but the population there has just as many addiction issues as those in
Mm.
Detroit. And so, but there aren't facilities. In the Upper Peninsula, where Rapid River is located, a lot of the counties tried to band together and pool their opioid settlement funds so there'd be
Yeah.
enough money to do something. They wanted to start their own treatment center up there. And um, one, they found out there wasn't enough money. And two, they needed state support, and the state wasn't supporting it enough to uh, finish off the job. And so now the counties are trying to figure out what to do on their own with their small pots of money. Basically, they're all siloed in how they're spending their money as opposed to
Mm.
pooling it, um, which is a problem in the rural areas. In the Rapid River case, at least one of the young men who passed away had tried to get into treatment, and there was nothing local, and a community maybe an hour and a half away had an opening for him. I think they said in 2 or 3 weeks, and you know as well as I, 2 or 3 weeks might as well be 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah.
If because you gotta catch people when they are willing to go in, and after that he died
Before he died of fentanyl
before he
before.
got into treatment. Yeah.
So sad. What is the state share of the money going to? Do
Again, in the big buckets, it's
hmm
in treatment and recovery, and what they're doing is most of the funds are going then to again to local communities, but it's it's
Okay.
it's it's designated. It's like to a local service in Escanaba
Got
that
it.
it's not like they're just handing more money off and say you figure out how to spend it. They're doing some due diligence on how to spend the money, and some of it's going to the tribes. We have a fair number
Sure.
of Native American tribes in Michigan, which have, as you know, a lot of addiction issues of their own to deal with.
Nationwide, tribal members are not seeing decline in overdose deaths.
Mm,
I don't know if you're seeing that in Michigan as well.
I don't know. I will look into it.
You
Thank you.
should.
I did not know that.
Yes, I've been reading quite a bit about it. They are not, it's actually African American men and tribal members are not um, seeing the same down tick in deaths. Sometimes they're even rising.
I wonder if that's resistance to naloxone. I wonder what's going on.
Yeah, it doesn't seem There's not been an answer to it, but it's something I also want to do a podcast on. So you might want to look in because I know you have quite a few um, tribes in the state of Michigan.
Yeah, I will. I will. Interesting.
It is.
But
So,
our numbers are going down overall in the state, just like they are nationwide,
sure.
slightly. And like you said, we think it's mainly because of the effectiveness of naloxone. Um, so
Yeah.
and that's a good step forward. But still, in the most recent year, we have figures for we had a death every 4 hours from opioids in the state. So these five deaths that we're talking about that I wrote about, we have that level of tragedy every 20 hours. It's just that this one happened to cluster in one small community.
Mm. Yes, I had a guest on earlier this year, Carol Trottier, who wrote about um, the grief and the burden of grief on this generation of young people. So, like, think of those 35 people who graduated. They'll always know that several of their class members died of this. And I wonder of that, the remaining, if others had also struggled with addiction issues. They were just didn't get fentanyl in their pills.
Right. It seems likely. I don't know. I know that
Sure.
several people I spoke to said that their siblings to their dead child had stopped drinking or had sort of turned over a leaf because it scared the hell out of them. I get it. But also there's a concern. At least some of the families believed, and police also believe it's possible that they died from drugs that were laced with fentanyl without them knowing there was fentanyl in it.
Oh, sure. I think that's
Yeah.
how most people die of it. I've interviewed one person who had such an addiction issue. He was seeking fentanyl, like seeking it, but he also had a large tolerance to it because he had been doing it so long, and built up the tolerance. But
Well, several of these people were in what their parents believed was recovery, and so also
mm,
then their tolerance may have been down also.
sure, because they hadn't been doing it for a while.
Right.
Oh, oh, so heartbreaking.
It is.
One of the lines that I read from the story, which actually was it on the principal? Yes, the principal Guffiston. Did I say that right? So she's now like carries Narcan with her at the high school. I mean, it should be distributed there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the biggest killer of youth. So God bless her. It must be so hard to be managing population like this of
Yeah.
that age.
Yeah. 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 And like you said, everyone knows everyone. It's like that principal taught several of these students before she was principal. She's best friends with the parents of another of the young men. Um, obviously all know each other at the grocery store, so
Of course.
yeah, it's tough. But like you said, it's there's a hope that maybe this greater awareness, and it's unfortunate how it had to happen, but will stop some future deaths. That seems to be the goal there now. Is they do, as the principal said, I don't want to attend any more funerals. So what do I need to do to stop it? So
Mm, mm. Heartbreaking. Now, do you carry naloxone with you, Ron?
I do. I have it in my car. It was given to me
Okay.
by a physician who specializes in addiction services. Um, Never used it, but it is there, just like it's
That's
in case
great.
I ever need it. So yeah, I've got some in my car.
That's wonderful. So, this podcast is called The Poisoning, and I think there's another interesting topic that the bridge, or I call it the bridge, I need to stop that. Bridge,
Everyone
Michigan.
does that. Everyone does
Okay,
that.
good. Bridge, Michigan has covered, which was a water crisis that also affected youth. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit of how children were affected by the Flint water crisis?
I wrote about this a little bit last year also, and then I was certainly a journalist for Bridge when it occurred. Um, for those not familiar, there Flint is a an urban community. It's a majority minority, and it's very poor. Didn't
Mm.
used to be. It's one of Michigan's auto towns. It's Pontiac, so that's where the Pontiac started.
Ah.
Um, and it's near there, and Flint was the same sort of thing and had those sort of communities. So um, it was poor, and at one point they were trying to save money. The short version of it is they were trying to save money, so they switched their water system to start taking water from the river next to them. And supposedly they had the right chemicals to clean up the water, but they didn't. And there were a couple of ingredients they didn't put in there that were supposed to. Very cheap ingredients.
Hmm.
And what happened is then all these pipes started leaching lead into the water system, and children started getting, the blood tests showed that they had high lead levels. And the state for a long, long time denied it was happening because they were going to be held liable, frankly. Um, and so it took a while, and it took a lot of like bravery from some physicians in Flint and also from some researchers to turn the tide so that everyone accepted there was a problem. But to get to your point about what the challenges were, lead can affect your brain, and it's not reversible. So that's the
Hmm.
problem with it. Um, and so there was and it affects young children the most instead of adults. And so there was a real worry about what the impact was going to be on a whole generation of Flint children. Um, but
Yeah.
oddly enough, the most recent reporting on it seems to indicate that perhaps, except for a small number of children in a few neighborhoods, most of the children of Flint did not receive enough lead to cause damage. Okay,
Oh, that's
it
great to
was
hear.
high. It was higher than it
Yeah.
should have been, but it was frankly the lead levels in the blood were lower than is very common in cities like Chicago.
Hmm.
So the it was it's a very good thing that it got so much attention. A lot of money poured into the city, which I think is the real story, to be honest, because then there were all these fresh food efforts there because it's supposed to mitigate the damage of lead. Who knew? But so then,
So, like fruits and vegetables
yeah,
help.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
Well, and
Who?
I'm sure
It's
we've seen in either rural areas or poor urban areas food deserts. That's where they
exactly
occur. And you're getting like packaged processed foods from like Quickie Mart stores, not
right.
a actual grocer.
Yeah, yeah. But um, it was a terrible. It was a terrible crisis of leadership.
Mm.
Um, but I think in the long run, I think we're going to find that the children of Flint were not as permanently damaged as was feared at the beginning. So it could be positive in that way, and it could be because it was mitigated by the efforts that have been undertaken.
Well, that's great to hear
Yeah.
because wow, I remember hearing about it. I didn't they even do a debate in the presidential
Hmm.
debate in the Flint area.
Yeah,
I
that was
remember reading reports that like all the like the national news people like had to have bottled water. Everybody was doing bottled water. And it's just I think in America we're just so used to being able to drink water from a faucet for free and you're not going to be poisoned.
yeah. You start to realize how precious our little connections are to like safety. You don't realize it until they're gone.
That's a great way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Or putting it.
It's tenuous.
It is tenuous. Wow. Well, Ron, do you have anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Just that with this rapid river situation, we
Yeah.
just felt that it was a way to tell the story of how there's no place that's safe. it doesn't matter how rural you are, how idyllic you are about like, your upbringing. A lot of these were, as they kept telling me, were God-fearing Christians. You know, um, you know, that this affects everyone, whether you're rich or poor or rural or urban. And the more we can realize that and people can raise awareness before they're going to a funeral, the better off we're all going to be.
Fentanyl does not discriminate. Well, thank you for joining the show today, Ron.
Oh, thank you. This has been a pleasure talking to you.
This is great.